sorry I laughed at you that time you got diarrhea at Barnes & Noble. And I'm sorry I told everyone about it. And I'm sorry for repeating it now.
Huh? Laura, I don't hate you because you're fat. You're fat because I hate you.
I just wish we could all get along like we used to in middle school. I wish that I could bake a cake made out of rainbows and smiles, and we'd all eat it, be happy.
She doesn't even go here.
Do you even go to this school?
No, I just have a lot of feelings.
Okay, go home.
I'm joined now in studio by Andrea Mrozek. She's Manager of Research at the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada. I've asked her to be with us and to sit more than an arm's length away from me because there are, in the media at least, reports of increasing aggressiveness among young women in Canada, even of a generation of mean girls. And the first thing I want to ask you is this a phenomenon that's really happening?
Well, I definitely looked into it before joining you here today, and there is an increase in violent behavior among girls. It still is true that this is a very small proportion of violent acts in general, but yeah, there is an uptick. So it's something that those who track those stats say is worth paying a bit of attention to, while keeping it in the context of understanding that mostly it's boys committing the violent crimes. Probably more common for girls is what they might call sort of a relational type of bullying, harassment at school, name calling, isolating somebody. That kind of thing can be as devastating to a kid in school as even violent acts.
Yeah, I mean, I pick up a newspaper and I read a story that some academic has discovered that girls can be mean in social settings. I think to myself that this may not be something that's only really happened in the last 3 years.
No.
But again, the thought here is that there's more of it, that it's more intense.
Well, again, the uptick is there in the stats, but naturally, of course, it's very true that both men and women can exhibit the very best and worst characteristics of human nature. So it's something to place in the context that we can see it in and to pay attention to and examine whether there's any reasons for this, specifically on the girls' side. I tend to think that there might be some reasons that we could see a change in girls' behavior and that those girls might be imitating boys, competing more aggressively to look like boys in the school setting. We have something called the sexual revolution that made men and women completely equal, and that's generally looked upon as a positive thing, but in some cases it means that girls are going to be imitating some of the negative characteristics that we have seen previously more frequently in boys.
Yeah, I think part of the promise when we're told men and women shall become at least a lot more alike is that we'd each pick up the better qualities of the other, but you know,
it also works the other way. It doesn't always just work in the positive sides.
Yeah, and certainly among feminists, there's some tendency to celebrate girls with a growl, or a movie like Thelma and Louise. And again, I realize this is just a movie, but again, there seems to be something of an idealization of women who turn feelings of hostility outward. Do you think that perhaps feminists have contributed something to a generation of young women who are more willing to be, at the very least, overtly obnoxious instead of subtly so?
I think so. I think there's some credence you could give to a theory like that, because we have been reticent to identify any differences between the genders, even where they're positive. So if girls used to be more polite or perhaps more quiet or calm, and we somehow seem to think that it's okay then if we see them rising in their aggression, that they're being more, that was actually one of the things that feminists have pushed for. In some regards it is positive that women should be more confident, more assertive. Where it goes over into violence, of course, that no longer holds true, but we seem incapable of distinguishing between the positive and the negatives and condemning the negatives where they do arrive in the manner that we applaud the positives where we've seen those as well.
Yeah, because I mean, I can think of a fairly clear distinction between assertiveness of some young man who says, here's a problem, I'm going to take responsibility for it, and aggression where some lout with a tattoo says, how'd you like a punch in the nose? I mean, it should, I realize there may be some connection, but it shouldn't be that hard to tell a positive channeling from a negative channeling of an outward flow of energy.
Yeah, you know where we're certainly seeing, we do see, and this is quantified as well, but a rise in sexual aggression among our girls, and that's something that a lot of experts have looked at, and it's a cause for grave concern. But if we're seeing an uptick in violent behavior, we're also seeing an uptick in other aggressive type of behaviors that we didn't see before in girls at younger and younger in ages. So it's something, I think, again, to put in the context, but to take a look at and examine why that might be.
When you say sexual aggression, do you mean things that would resemble sexual assault or even constitute it, or do you mean simply taking the lead in initiating relationships with a physical
sorry,
component?
I shouldn't have blended those two together, because no, I'm not talking about assault or anything like that, but just being more available and more aggressive in sexual behavior in a dating type of context, although it's hardly dating if you think of a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old in a sort of sexual scenario in the high school setting. So I should have distinguished between the two, but I think that there is a lowering of former standards in some regards that we ought to be tracking with.
Yeah, now here we're both probably going to come across as prude, saying perhaps everybody ought to be more reticent about that kind of thing. I mean, that's something that feminists might celebrate, but if you really are seeing more young women turning up in court charged with crimes of violence, that, it seems to me, would be cause for concern and something we really ought to be tracking. Thanks very much for joining us to talk about that. We'll be back after this.